Hey, everybody, welcome back. We're going to be doing a deep dive today
Yeah.
on an excerpt from a sermon on the book of Job.
Oh, wow.
It's about suffering and grace.
Okay.
Yeah. And it really kind of unpacks a lot of interesting things about the story of Job. Things that people have been puzzling over for centuries.
Yeah, for sure.
Like the idea of a heavenly court,
Right.
Satan as this adversary figure, and the age-old question of, like, why do good people suffer?
Yeah.
But I think one of the most interesting things about this sermon is
Okay.
it suggests that Satan might actually have a necessary role to play in God's plan.
Okay. Yeah. That's a really fascinating take. And that's something that this sermon does really well.
Yeah.
It doesn't shy away from difficult questions like that.
Right.
And it really kind of starts by setting up this really dramatic scene
Okay.
with a meeting in the heavenly court. We have these sons of God who are often interpreted as angels.
Who are gathering before God. And it's almost like they're reporting back to him on their duties like a council.
It's like we're getting a sneak peek into a divine board meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Satan walks in.
Yeah.
Not exactly who you expect to see in a heavenly setting, right?
Right.
So what's he doing there?
Well, the sermon describes him as the adversary.
Okay.
This is someone who's been, kind of observing humans on Earth.
Okay.
And he's not exactly impressed with what he's seen.
So is he like this cosmic prosecuting attorney always looking for a reason to kind of doubt humanity's goodness?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It makes you think about the very nature of God's government.
Right.
The sermon goes into 3 different models.
Okay.
We have polytheism.
Right.
We have absolute monism.
Okay.
And then we have the biblical model.
So polytheism, that's like the idea of many gods, right? Kind of all vying for power.
Yeah, exactly. It's that concept of a cosmic power struggle.
Okay, got it.
Then you have absolute monism, where God's power is absolute and there's no room for any opposing force.
Right?
But the sermon is arguing that the biblical model is a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
It acknowledges God's ultimate power, but it also acknowledges the existence of spiritual forces, both good and evil.
So it's not just a simple black and white situation. There's shades of gray.
Precisely. And this complexity is crucial for understanding Satan's role.
Okay.
The sermon actually makes this really kind of surprising argument that while Satan's motives are clearly malicious,
Okay.
his role as this adversary might actually be necessary.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, it forces a test of true faith.
Okay, so how does Job fit into all of this?
Well, in this heavenly court scene, God actually points Job out to Satan specifically.
Okay.
Describes him as this blameless and upright man. It's almost as if God is setting the stage for a test, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, like he's putting Job in the spotlight. But why would God do that?
Well, that's where Satan's challenge comes in.
Okay.
He basically tells God that Job is only pious because he's been blessed and protected.
Okay.
Take those blessings away, Satan argues, and see if his faith remains.
So it's a test of Job's motivations.
Right.
Like, is he devoted to God simply because life is good?
Yeah.
Or is there something deeper there?
Exactly. And to answer that question,
Okay.
God allows Satan to inflict suffering upon Job.
Wow. So what's so fascinating about this whole setup is it's that the sermon uses this to explore the idea that suffering doesn't necessarily indicate a lack of faith or God's favor.
Right. It's not a punishment.
Yeah, so you're saying that suffering can actually strengthen faith.
Exactly.
How does that work?
Well, the sermon draws a parallel to a passage in the New Testament where the Apostle Peter talks about the tested genuineness of faith being more precious than gold.
I've always struggled with that verse. I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
But I've never really quite understood what that means. Like, how can going through difficult times possibly make your faith more valuable?
That's a question that a lot of us grapple with.
Yeah.
It's easy to praise God when things are going well.
Yeah, right.
But it's in those moments of suffering, those times when we question everything, that our faith is truly put to the test.
Okay.
Think about it like this.
Okay.
If you think about gold, it has to be refined by fire
Right.
to burn away the impurities
Yeah.
and leave behind something stronger and more valuable.
I see. So like Job, he loses everything.
Exactly.
Well, family health.
Yeah, he's in absolute agony,
Wow.
both physically and emotionally.
Uh-huh.
But even in those darkest moments,
Okay.
he never completely abandons his faith.
That's true. He does rail against God, questions his justice.
Yeah.
But there's always this underlying thread of belief there.
Exactly.
He never just says, like, I reject this completely.
And that's the point.
Right.
Job's suffering forces him to wrestle with his beliefs on a much deeper level. He moves beyond a superficial understanding of God to this place of raw, authentic faith.
So it's like his faith is being purified in the fire of his suffering.
That's a great way to put it. And this idea of suffering leading to purification. It's not just limited to Job.
Right.
The Apostle Peter talks about it too.
Right.
Uses that same analogy of gold being refined by fire.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it now, but how does all of this connect to grace?
Okay.
Where does grace fit into this picture of suffering and refinement?
Well, grace is actually woven throughout this whole story.
Okay.
First, consider God's grace in even allowing Job to be tested.
Okay.
It might seem counterintuitive.
Right.
But God grants Satan permission to afflict Job. Because he trusts in Job's underlying faith.
Wow.
There's a deep respect there for Job's free will.
So it's not about sheltering Job from hardship.
Right.
But trusting him to navigate it.
Exactly.
Right.
And then throughout Job's ordeal, we see glimpses of God's grace sustaining him. Even in his moments of deepest despair.
Right.
Job finds solace in his relationship with God. He continues to seek him. To pour out his heart to him.
So even when he's questioning God, there's still this sense of connection, of being held by a greater power.
Precisely. And ultimately, God's grace is evident in Job's restoration.
Okay.
God doesn't just return what was lost.
Right.
He blesses Job even more abundantly.
So it's like Job emerges from the fire, not only refined, but also transformed. His faith is deeper, his character is stronger, and his relationship with God is richer.
And perhaps that's the most profound lesson we can glean from this story. Suffering, while incredibly difficult, can actually be a conduit for immense growth and ultimately a deeper experience of God's grace.
So it's not about seeking out suffering, but recognizing that it can have a purpose, that it can be a part of a larger journey toward wholeness and spiritual maturity.
Exactly. It's a perspective shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of viewing suffering as purely negative, we can start to see it as a potential catalyst for transformation.
Okay.
And that's where I think this sermon makes a really powerful connection to our lives today.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in those day-to-day struggles. Feel overwhelmed by hardship.
Yeah.
But the story of Job reminds us that even in our darkest moments, grace is still at work.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us to the core of this sermon's message.
Okay.
It's not just about understanding the story of Job. It's about applying its wisdom to our own lives. It's about asking ourselves, if we were in Job's shoes, how would we respond? Would our faith hold firm in the face of such immense suffering?
Yeah, that's a really tough question to think about.
It is. It's easy to talk about faith when life is good, right?
Right.
But what happens when the rug is pulled out from under us?
You know, when we experience, loss, pain, disappointment.
It really makes you examine, like, what your beliefs are actually founded on.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you clinging to faith because it's comfortable?
Right.
Because it gives you easy answers.
Yeah. Or is there something deeper there?
Yeah.
Something that can really anchor you, even in the storm.
Right.
And this sermon, it really challenges us to dig deep and ask ourselves some hard questions. It's not about judging anyone or condemning anyone, but it's about prompting some honest introspection.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so powerful about the story of Job.
Yeah.
It doesn't shy away from the messiness of suffering.
It doesn't sugarcoat it.
No. It acknowledges the pain, the doubt, the anger that can come up.
Absolutely.
When we're faced with really difficult things.
And through Job's journey, we see that it's okay to wrestle with those emotions.
Right.
It's okay to question, to lament, to cry out to God in anguish.
It's almost like those acts of questioning and lamenting
are a part of the refining process.
I think you're right.
Yes.
It's through that struggle, that wrestling with our faith, that we come to a deeper understanding of who God is and what it truly means to believe.
So suffering can actually be a path towards a more authentic and resilient faith.
I believe so. It forces us to move beyond that superficial understanding of God to a place of genuine relationship.
It's not just about believing the right things. It's about trusting in God's presence and his love, even when we don't understand what's happening.
And that's where grace comes in.
Okay.
Even in the midst of our suffering, when we feel lost and alone, God's grace is there, holding us, guiding us, and ultimately leading us to a place of healing and transformation.
This has been such a great deep dive.
It has.
What really stuck out to me is this idea that suffering isn't necessarily something to be afraid of or avoided.
Right.
It can actually be a catalyst for growth, for sure.
For deepening our faith and experiencing God's grace.
Absolutely. It's a challenging concept.
Yeah.
But I think it's one that offers a lot of hope.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even in our brokenness, there's beauty and purpose and the possibility of redemption.
So as we all move forward, think about this.
Yeah.
What are some of the trials and hardships you're facing right now? How can you view them through the lens of this sermon?
Right. What opportunities for growth and transformation might be hidden within those experiences?
You're not alone in your struggles.
Yeah.
God's grace is always available.
It is.
Waiting to meet you in your pain and guide you toward healing.
And wholeness.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the book of Job.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you found it thought-provoking and enriching.
Absolutely.
Now that we have unpacked Book of Job a bit, we encourage you to reflect on how these truths can be applied to your life this week. For ongoing encouragement, follow Grace Gospel Church on social media GGEFDE on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and more. Subscribe for more deep dive conversations each week as we explore the messages from Grace Gospel Church. For more resources to grow in faith, visit www.gracegospel.church. We pray for your continued growth in faith.